Hello and welcome to the edition of the Daf Yomi for today. We're starting a new Masechta Tractate Menachot first part using Steinsaltz edition. So I'm going to just read the introduction to Perek 1, Chapter 1. And when one brings a meal offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it, and put frankincense upon it. And he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest, and he shall remove his hand of its fine flour and its oil, together with all of its frankincense. And the priest shall make its memorial part smoke upon the altar, offering made by fire, pleasing aroma to the Lord. And that's from Leviticus 2, chapter 2, verse 1 to 2. And this is the law of the burnt offering, of the meal offering, and of the sin offering, and of the guilt offering, and of the consecration offering, and of the sacrifice of peace offerings. And that's Leviticus 7:37. Although meal offerings differ from slaughtered offerings, e.g. meal offerings are bought from flour, whereas slaughtered offerings are bought from livestock, and meal offerings require preparation before the sacrifice, whereas slaughtered offerings are fit for sacrifice in the natural state. Nevertheless, the Torah teaches the same base halacha apply both to meal offerings and slaughtered offerings, as indicated by the verse, this is the law of the burnt offering, of the meal offering, and the sin offering, Leviticus 7:37. Accordingly, many comparisons can be drawn between the halacha of meal offerings and those of slaughtered offerings, particularly with regard to what does and does not disqualify an offering. The first chapter, Menachot, in many aspects parallels the first chapter of Zevachim, was both addressed to various ways in which an offering can be disqualified through improper intent. This chapter will deal extensively with comparison between meal offerings and slaughtered offerings. For example, certain slaughtered offerings are not rendered unfit when they are slaughtered not for their sake, despite the fact that the owner does not fulfill his obligation through that offering. Other slaughtered offerings are disqualified entirely through such intent. This chapter will discuss the halacha of meal offerings whose sacrificial rites are performed not for their sake, and will address the question of which meal offerings are fit and which are disqualified. Furthermore, slaughtered offerings are disqualified when their sacrificial rites are performed with the intent to sacrifice them or partake them beyond the designated time of the designated area, pigul. If the improper intent concerns their designated time, it will render pigul as well. This chapter will discuss which meal offerings are disqualified on account of such intent and which are disqualified pigul. Since an offering is disqualified due to its intent only if one had such intent during the performance of one of the offerings for sacrificial rites, the chapter will also clarify the details of the four for sacrificial rites of meal offerings, which parallel those of slaughtered offerings. Additionally, just as slaughtered offerings are disqualified when their sacrificial rites are performed by one unfit to perform the rites or in a manner unfit for those rites, so too meal offerings are disqualified as a result of these factors. The sacrifice of a meal offering involves procedures different from those of a slaughtered offering, and the chapter will analyze which procedures will disqualify a meal offering when not performed in a proper manner, and which do not disqualify it after the fact. As already noted, slaughtered offerings require no preparation before the slaughter. By contrast, with regard to meal offerings, one must first mix oil into the flour and then place frankincense upon the mixture before the priest may perform the sacrificial process by removing a handful from the flour. As the process differs significantly from that of a slaughtered offering, this chapter will deal extensively with various questions that arise with regard to the mixture of flour, oil, and frankincense, and the removal of the handful as well as its proper measure. These are the main issues addressed in this chapter. Halachas involving meal offerings will also be examined. So let's go. So Daf 2, Amud A. The Mishnah. Kol hamenachos shenik mosu shelo nishman kisheros ela shelo anem l'shem chova chutz mi manchas chotei uminchas katana not kinaos. When one brings a meal offering to the temple, the priest removes a handful from it and places the handful into a service vessel, conveys it to the altar, and burns it. At that point, the remainder is permitted to the priest for consumption, and the owner has fulfilled his obligation. In this context, the Mishnah teaches all meal offerings. So what does that mean? Kol hamenachos v'cholu. There are 8 types of meal offerings whose sacrifice requires removal of a handful, which is burned upon the altar. For these meal offerings, the removal of a handful and its subsequent sacrifice upon the altar renders permitted the remainder of the meal offering to the priest for consumption. 5 of these meal offerings are brought as gift offerings: a meal offering of flour, a meal offering of loaves, a meal offering of wafers, a meal offering prepared in a pan, and a meal offering prepared in a deep pan. And this is derived from Leviticus chapter 2, verse 1 to 10. The remaining meal offerings are a meal offering of a sinner. See Leviticus 5, 11 to 13. The meal offering of jealousy brought by a sojourner. See Numbers 5:25. And the Omer meal offering, Leviticus 23, 10 to 11, which is not mentioned in this Mishnah, but is the subject of a dispute between Amoraim and Forei, from which a handful was removed not for their sake. So what does that mean? Shalom lishman, not for their sake. The Gemara in Zevachim 2b establishes this refers specifically to an instance where a priest sacrificed an offering explicitly for the sake of a different offering. E.g., he sacrifices a burnt offering with the intent that it be a peace offering. But if the priest sacrificed an offering without a specific intent, the offering is valid and fulfills the obligation of the owner. Even the meal offering of a sinner and the meal offering of jealousy are valid when sacrificed without any specific intent, and that's from the Kutei Halachot. The Gemara does not cite a source for the halacha that meal offerings must be sacrificed for their sake. It does further explain that it is based on the halacha of peace offerings, and there is equated to different offerings. This is the law of the burnt offering, of the meal offering, and of the sin offering, and of the guilt offering, the consecration offering, and of the sacrifice of peace offerings. Because 7:37 says derived from this verse that the obligation to sacrifice an offering for its own sake applies to all types of offering, as in the Zevachim 4a. A meal offering can be disqualified through certain improper intentions showing the performance of any of its four sacrificial rites, either the removal of the handful or placement of the handful in a service vessel is conveyed to the altar and its placement on the fire upon the altar. With regard to meal offerings, whose sacrifices were not performed for their own sake, e.g., if a handful was removed from a voluntary meal offering for the sake of the meal offering of a sinner, or a handful was removed from a deep pan meal offering for the sake of a pan offering, or if a rite was performed not for the sake of its owner, e.g., the meal offering of one person was sacrificed for the sake of another person, these offerings are valid, but they do not satisfy the obligations of the owners. 13:1, 6:15:2. But for the sake of another meal offering are fit for sacrifice. Kasher was fit, like kasha, like kosher. The remainder of the sacrificial rites of these offerings was performed in the appropriate manner and was commented on the Mishnah. Accordingly, the handful of this meal offering must be burned upon the altar, after which remainder is eaten by the priest, as Rashi. But these offerings did not satisfy the obligation of the owner, who must therefore bring another offering. This is a halacha with regard to all meal offerings except for the meal offering of a sinner. Menachot. There are several sins for which one must bring a sliding scale offering in order to achieve atonement. In these cases, a wealthy individual sacrifices a lamb or goat as a sin offering. If one cannot afford this, he sacrifices doves or pigeons instead. If he is too poor to afford even that, he brings a meal offering, says Rashi. In the case of meal offering of a sin and the meal offering of jealousy, if any of the four sacrificial rites of meal offerings were performed not for their sake, the meal offering is entirely disqualified. That's from the Rambam Sefer Avodah Hilchot Pesulim Hamikdoshin 15:2. And the meal offering of jealousy is but a part of the right of a woman suspected by a husband of having been unfaithful as sota. In those cases, if a priest removes the handful not for its own sake, the offering is disqualified. With regard to a meal offering of a sinner, and the meal offering of jealousy, from which the priest removed a handful not for their sake, or he placed a handful for them in a vessel, or conveyed the handful to the altar, or burned the handful on the altar, not for their sake, or for their sake, or not for their sake, and not for their sake and for their sake, they are disqualified. The Mishnah elaborates how these rites performed for their sake and not for their sake. And it is a case where one removes the handful with two intentions: for the sake of a meal offering of a sinner, and for the sake of a voluntary meal offering. How are these rites performed not for their sake and for their sake? It is in a case where one removes the handful with two intentions: for the sake of a meal offering, voluntary meal offering, and for the sake of a meal offering of a sinner. The Mishnah teaches all meal offerings from which a handful was removed not for their sake, but for the sake of another meal offering offered for sacrifice. But these offerings did not satisfy the obligation of the owner. The Gemara asks, why do I need the Mishnah to teach, but these offerings did not, El Shiloh? The Gemara's question is based on the assumption that the Tana of the Mishnah invariably uses concise and official language. Accordingly, the term Ella indicates the offering was slaughtered not for its own sake. It is considered valid in multiple aspects, and its only deficiency as an an offering is that it does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. In light of this, the Gemara asks the following question: aside from the fact that its remainder may be consumed by the priest, in what other aspect is this offering considered valid, as indicated by the word Ella? To satisfy the obligation, that it is simply, and they did not velo satisfy the obligation of the owner. What does the word Allah add? The Gemara responds by adding this word. The Mishnah teaches us that the only deficiency of these offerings is that they do not satisfy the obligation of the owner, but the meal offering itself is valid, and it is still prohibited to deviate. It is prohibited to perform the sacrificial rites of offerings with improper intentions. Therefore, if this is a sacrificial animal slaughtered not for its own sake, or if a handful is taken from a meal offering not for its own sake, subsequent sacrificial rites of the offering must be performed for their own sake, whether the initial deviation was intentional or omitting. 15.3. Some commentaries infer from Rashi's explanation that it is prohibited to deviate from protocol only with regard to subsequent rites. There is no prohibition against deviating further with regard to the same rite that was already performed not for its own sake. Commentary attributed to the Rashba. From the protocol of the sacrificial process, for example, if a handful was removed from a meal offering not for its own sake, prohibited to also burn it not for its own sake. This halacha is in accordance with the statement of Rava, as Rava says, with regard to a burnt offering that one slaughtered not for its own sake, it's still prohibited to sprinkle its blood on the altar not for its own sake. The Gemara adds, if you wish, propose a logical argument to support the statement, and if you wish, cite a verse. Why is it necessary to provide a verse as a source for the prohibition against deviating if there is a logical basis for this prohibition? The answer is that based on logic alone, one can suggest the opposite, that if one is already deviated from protocol, and with a handful not for its own sake, no prohibition is violated with further deviating. In light of this verse, this reason cannot be accepted, as the verse teaches that the animal is now considered an entirely different offering, i.e. a gift offering. Consequently, any previous errors have no bearing on future deviation from the protocol of this new offering. As proof, the Gemara elaborates, if you wish to propose a logical argument, just because one deviated from protocol in the sacrifice once by removing the handful, could it be that he should continue to deviate from protocol in all the rest of the sacrificial rites? One deviation does not justify additional deviation. And if you wish to cite a verse, that which has gone out of your lips you shall observe and do, according to what you have vowed as a gift offering to the Lord your God, that which you have promised with your mouth, Deuteronomy 23:24. The Gemara analyzes the verse, is it a gift offering? It is a vow offering. Although both vow offerings and gift offerings are designated by means of a vow, the relation between the individual bringing the offering and the animal differs in each case. A vow offering is an obligation imposed upon the person, i.e. one takes a vow by saying, it is incumbent upon me to bring such and such an offering. Therefore, if the designated animal is lost or becomes disqualified, the donor is obligated to bring a different one in its place. By contrast, a gift offering relates to a specific item, and one says, this item or animal is a gift offering, and accordingly it becomes lost or becomes disqualified, the donor is not required to replace it, and that's from Kinnan 1:1. Why does the verse first call it a vow offering and subsequently call it a gift offering? Rather, the verse teaches that if you acted in accordance with how you vowed, i.e. if you sacrifice the offering for its own sake, your obligation to fulfill the vow will be fulfilled. But if you do not act in accordance with your vow, it does not fulfill the obligation incurred by the vow and will be considered a gift offering. In other words, this animal is considered as though it is a different offering from the one the owner was obligated to bring, and therefore it does not serve to fulfill its obligation. With regard to the halacha of its sacrifice and consumption, it is not actually a gift offering. It must be treated as though it were the offering brought to fulfill the initial obligation, and it must still be sacrificed for its own sake. And that's from the Tivot HaKodesh, Sidukudi Halachat on Zevachim 2a. That's the end of the first Omid. I wish you a very good day and all the best in Israel. Bye.